nice to see some familiar faces again this week. Just going to wait a couple of minutes just to make sure that people are getting in and we can let them into the room. Okay. So it's nice to see everybody this evening. Thank you for coming to the penultimate event for the SSA Dialogues. We have Kristina Chan tonight, who is going to be talking about her work. Just a wee bit of housekeeping before that. If we can just pop everybody's mic onto mute, it just makes it a lot easier for the artists to be able to talk about their work. We are recording, so if you're uncomfortable with being seen on camera, if you just want to turn the video off, you can just see your name, and that's all you'll really see. So I'm just going to hand you over to Kristina and let her crack on with her talk.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, yes, I'm Kristina. Let me see if I can get this screen share working. Okay, there we go. My name is Kristina Chan. I am a printmaker. Sorry. Yes, I'm a printmaker, and my practice is based very much on narrative and site specificity. I travel to places, I record my impressions, learning kind of local histories and lore, and looking at archives, conducting interviews, trying to develop a kind of sense, or rather paint a portrait of a place. Very much from the view of an outsider. I've spent a lot of time traveling throughout my life and throughout my practice, and I like the idea of coming into a story out of context. It lets you feel a place first, and I think that's very important. That's where I come from with a lot of my work. So working predominantly with printmaking and alternative photography. I trained in Paris, and I worked there as an edition printer before moving to the UK to do my master's at the Royal College of Art in 2014. Oh, sorry. So I've always loved print as a medium. For me, it was really evocative, and it's kind of the perfect medium between painting and photography, because it can be very painterly, it can be very immediate, like with monoprinting or marbling, even chincolet, or it can also be quite rigid in its chemistry and its process, especially with more photographic ones. And putting those two together, I found really allowed for this space in between kind of place and experience. And that's when I began working with the idea of place as a narrative itself. So this story that we interrupt by coming across it and having these timelines merge, if you will. So when this intersection happens and this narrative collides, then it becomes this weaving of experience, and that's what I try to evoke. So when you're confronted with this, not so much thought, but this essence of a place, there's often a big element of tiling. So you can kind of see it in the studio here, where I often put things together, and part of this is practical, but the other part of it is that I really like the idea of quite literally and metaphorically piecing parts of a puzzle together, and how I think that really helps construct it and separate it, and give you the idea that, you know, it's happening as you go along. With that comes a lot of hand embellishments. I like to go into my prints afterwards. So I often think about it as working backwards in time. I'll start with a photo that that turns into a film and a negative for a plate. It goes through all these different processes. It gets on the press, and then after that, I like to draw into it, or monoprint, or just work in until you kind of can float in between. Again, this idea of what is it, and if someone can't quite figure it out, like for me, I really enjoy when people go, well, what exactly is it? Is it a painting? Is it a print? Is it a photo? And I find this question, this space, and that is also really interesting, and it helps with all the questions that I'm asking myself. So you can see it here, for example, is a work I did a few years ago with Hidden Door, the Hidden Door Festival in Edinburgh back in 2007. So if anyone recognises it, it's the Lee Theatre, back before it opened up for the festival venue. And I was lucky enough to be able to go inside and get a sense of the place, take lots of photos, walk through the aisles, see it maybe at its most forgotten, so that it can, you know, and then create a piece to be on display when it was opened up again, you know. So this idea of a before and after, or a theatre kind of waiting for its audience, this stillness, I find really, really interesting. And to get that, this lithograph kind of started as this one piece and morphed into 3, and then into, you know, 1 meter, into 8, and it just kept going because the space was so vast, and it filled you, and that's what I really liked. So you can see it installed along the left side of the theatre during the festival, and it completely changed the context of these places that you experience and how you experience a place. Is it abandoned or is it a venue? Is just so fascinating to me. And so with that comes this curiosity, I think, with how we can stretch the definition of print. So not only in scale, but kind of these versatilities between the 2D and the 3D. So a few years ago, with that in mind, I began experimenting with low reliefs, and again, looking at that kind of very common saying that, wow, the plate's much more interesting than the print almost. So I became obsessed with this ceiling panel that had fallen onto the ground of an old opera house, and it was crumbling and cracked. And looking at it, I tried to imagine what it looked like whole. So I started carving the panel into a lino plate, and I took a mold of it, and then I cast it in bronze. And I did this 4 times, kind of each time we're trying to imagine, or like each time making it a little bit more whole, until in the end I came up with my own version of what it would have looked like. And I guess part of this was asking myself how we piece things together, how we put information and interpret it and construct it, how we build narratives from, you know, what little data we have, if it is experience, if it is, say, an interview, if it is a fact or a history book, or if it's much less analytical. So it becomes, and like, where does that lead us? And it becomes this kind of infinite stratification of these layers that bridge us between what's seen and what's felt and what's made, and what kind of in the end also makes itself. And what was interesting as well with this work, it's a plate, but it's also the piece, and of course kind of again playing with what something is. And it later became a floor installation, which I also really like because they started a ceiling panel. So everything, you know, as time passes, also changes its definition of what it is through how it's seen. So I do work on a kind of, I guess history plays a really big part in my work, almost like pockets of stories throughout history. So they're not particularly a linear sense, but more of a minor or abstract idea of these places, if they're strange or forgotten, remote, or just kind of left in a way that they're waiting for these moments to be shared again. And when they're so far removed, they kind of seem to write themselves in this own myth, if you will. And my work has brought me to some very strange places, and a lot of them are really ancient. So I've long for like stopped wondering if I look for them or if they kind of find me at this point. But I try to, with each space, emanate a style, or choose my medium to reflect it the most. Having said that, this is a series of woodcuts. Well, they started as screen prints on wood that I painted in after, and then cut and kind of carved into the plate itself. So it was again a print that was a plate, and this idea came from a train wreck I discovered along the Pacific Northwest of Canada. And it was just these incredible series of disjointed train carriages, and kind of leading throughout the woods in no manner that made any kind of sense. And the more I started looking into it, the more the mystery kind of kept on going. And I'm sure part of it was that the history needed to go on, because it wasn't relatively, it wasn't too old to not know what had happened to this wreck in the 50s. But I think part of the mystery, or part of the fun, is guessing, much like with the lino cuts. So with my work comes, you can see a book in the middle of these pieces, and again, these kind of 6 meters, about the journey of discovering how much of a story you want to uncover before you kind of lose the magic of it. And so with each of these works comes the story of the place, and the story of me in the place. And I just, yeah, I find it really fascinating. So I would say most recently I traveled to Australia for research into another book, and this was just at the end of 2019, and I was invited to go to the Blue Mountains, which is a heritage and national park, to look at its histories of specific areas and ghost towns. But as many of you remember, that was also when the bushfires were beginning. So as I went for a very different reason, to look at a past of a history of a town where there was a lot of coal mining involved, and it's still kind of quite ongoing, so I won't just give too much away. But as I looked into this town that was kind of covered in its own way in smoke, we were also being covered in smoke, and kind of waking up to this haze and these plumes and these incredible kind of orange skies and strange suns that were refracted through all of the ash. And all of those days kind of trying to be there for one purpose, but very much living in another very immediate story, and having those two coincide in such a strange and surreal way. Like for me, it really felt like the past and the present, here specifically, were just colliding in a way you could literally taste in your mouth, or like on the tip of your tongue, and you could feel it when you breathed. And it was very, very strange, but very poignant as well. And I think that's when I decided, so these are some of the works I've been making from that, but that's when I realized that, I mean, it's not the image of the story. It's not the image, but the story that we encounter when we look at a place. So I think without the background, you know, it would be a place, it would be very much maybe more of an ecological conversation, not that it's not, but there's such a personal aspect to my work that I think is nice to be able to talk about in this context, but it's not often seen, and that's okay. That's not particularly needed either, but it adds an interesting thought that these ideas of plot lines, especially with narratives, that you do compartmentalize when it comes to an image. So you have this landscape, if you will, that is measured in lifetime. So it's this never-ending story. But you only have this moment, you have this frame, you have this still, and however you make it is going to be how you saw it, that singular kind of expression. So I think with this in mind, I've begun looking at my own story in all of my travels, and not only how I've shaped these places by kind of interrupting them in their long scale and eras, but how they've shaped me, and how this I think can be seen really strongly through a recent collaboration with very talented photographer Itamar Fried. We've been working together for the last few years on a body of work called Lucid Dreams, and it just finished with a solo show in Beers London yesterday, actually, and it's gone kind of all around now, which is really exciting. It started in Litvak Contemporary and back in October. It's since been up in Edinburgh Printmakers, if anyone saw those, kind of this piece specifically, and a few others. And next year it'll go to Hamburg in Nord Art. But it's interesting because making the series, Itamar and I, we spoke at length about, I think quite simply or complexly, what it means to be. So this idea of being somewhere, is it geographical or is it more of a mentality? And can you ever occupy a space without altering it? And then more importantly, maybe when you leave, do you take part of that with you? Kind of a very much, are you the sum of your parts question, I suppose. And the works look at these, so they draw elements from all the places we've been and we lived, and I think it's something everyone can relate to. Kind of we have this natural curiosity, and we go to places and we leave home, and you know, you always, with that, you take all the places that you came from with you and all the places that left an impression, and you carry them with you. But it also becomes kind of romanticized in a way. So as our memory fades, you take the best out of it. So it kind of paints this, this romanticized idea of a memory. And so in that sense as well, just time tends to blend reality and this fantasy together. So this piece specifically is a cyanotype that we worked on. It's got 12 pieces to it, and it blends, this landscape has 5 or 6 different places, taking all of our backgrounds, all of our conversations together, and puts them together in something that on first kind of look, it's quite homogenous, and then you start to notice it's actually impossible. The trees wouldn't belong where they are. The animals don't have that same, you know, they're not native to each other. And so it becomes this strange sense of limbo, or even a bit like dioramas, or a bit of nature as an artifact, or these captured moments that you can't quite differentiate. And putting them together and putting these parts of the story, kind of where you're from and where you're going. So these 2 works I really liked to tell the story of, because I always see them as our self-portrait. So on the left it's an aloe tree, which for Itamar, he's from Israel, and it's he always thinks of aloes. And for me, it's ferns. I grew up in the Pacific. I grew up next on the border of woods, and every day I'd walk through them and I could smell the kind of the rain and see them falling on these massive ferns that just covered the ground. And so for us, this is kind of, these are who we are, but we all, everywhere we came from, we then came in London and we brought that with us and we blended it into kind of everything we look at going forward. And kind of in a sense, there's this haze and this uncertainty and this ambiguity with, you know, everything you are is where you're from, but also you're everything where you're going as well, your goals, your ideas, and how that's so symbolic of the landscape as well, of changing seasons, time passing, this idea of even the photograph. So for this work, it's called Oh Dear. What I really like is almost all of, well, our work and my work, both scenarios, is that we like playing with the sense of reality, but also formality, so of a medium. And with this, we really had a lot of fun with photography. So the foreground is in positive and the background is in negative, and working with just even what or how you can stretch a photograph, if it can look like a painting, if it can look like a drawing, if it can kind of do all these things. I think it's really a fun way to look at your work. And so I think I'll just close with some install shots of the recent show, of the works in the space, and then maybe we'll open it up with some questions. But yeah, and what I loved about this show is it had everything from, you know, digital photography to etching to hand-drawn elements, and it's so cohesive that I really like that things really can blend together and become whole in that way. And maybe that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I really liked seeing the show when it was in the printmakers. It was a fantastic show. We're currently live on YouTube as well, so if anyone's got questions on there, we can get some questions from there. But if you want to open up the floor to anybody that's got any questions to ask Kristina? Anyone? No? Oh, Rona.
Hi, thanks very much for that. It was really interesting. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how you've worked collaboratively with the photographer? So what's your kind of process between the two of you when you're doing that show?
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I think we get that question a lot, and it's not a collaboration in maybe the most obvious sense. There's no one work where I could tell you I did something and he did something, or vice versa. I think that was really important, was we wanted to create this hybrid between both of us. So whether or not we put all of our photos kind of in this big pool, if you will, and we just started from there. We didn't want it to be about, say, the artist, or I guess maybe in a way our egos, like it's our photos or it's our work, it's our places. That didn't really matter. We wanted something that was more than that. So we would start with a photo, do something, have a discussion, edit it together, look at it, you know, discuss the medium, test it. We would be in the print studio kind of every day seeing, is this a cyanotype? Is it an etching? How do we even in making the plates, we kind of play with the vacuum, kind of be more dreamlike? Can we break the seal? What, you know, like how can we create the image to reflect everything we've been talking about? Or even this idea of, with Lucid Dreams, we really liked the idea of creating a space that was it was a lucid dream. So we, as the artist, controlled every part of the narrative in a playful way, in a way that just kind of caught you off guard. So in doing that, we had a lot of fun, but it was very much kind of, it developed very naturally, I would say, but next to each other, and oddly enough, in kind of relevance of Zoom, and I think the last few months, we talk a lot about how it's only been possible kind of through technology and through maybe this distance, like a virtual distance as well, because we lived in London when we started, when we've worked on a few projects, but since then we've both moved around. So I've moved up to Scotland, he's moved to Israel, to Australia, and we've continued to be able to work together because of this virtual space where we can still kind of shoot ideas over to the other, and then eventually we meet up. The making is still very much physical, and in the same room, but it's fascinating to me that without kind of technology, we couldn't make a show that's almost very quite analog in a way. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, me. Hi. It was really nice to see your work. Thank you. I was just wondering what kind of projects you have for the near future, and especially now with this, well, this year so different.
It's a really good question. It's been a very strange year, hasn't it? I think thankfully I am still working on this Australian series with the residency. I'm making an artist book, which has very recently, I've heard, been picked up by the Canadian Arts Council to turn into a podcast. So that will be a kind of more future project that I think was relatively uninhibited by recent events. But there's been a lot of catch up. It hasn't, I won't lie and say it's been, you know, the easiest thing, but it has taught me, I think, versatility, or the ability to be more virtual, to find alternatives, and to find new platforms. I never would have thought of making these artist books into an audiobook in a way. I think because I was trained as a bookbinder, also because I very much like a book, but it's just opened my mind in ways that I don't think the last few months, had they not happened, would. And then, like I said, I think things are very much picking up. We've got a few upcoming works in the Woolwich Contemporary Print Fair, as well as Dream and Blue is going to go to Nord Art in Hamburg in June 2021. And slowly I think things are getting rescheduled and getting back on track. I hope so anyways.
Thank you. This is just kind of hitting our half-an-hour mark. If anyone does have a last question, we can squeeze it in, but if not, would like to say thank you very much to Kristina for taking part this evening. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I hope that everyone's enjoyed themselves. We have one more event which will run on Wednesday with Noel Griffin, and it'd be great to see some more of you there. And if we could give a round of applause to Kristina, that'd be great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.